Imagine this picture. A tiny, almost insignificant-looking passage on a huge global map. It's like a narrow hallway, right? Barely wide enough for two giant ships to squeeze past each other. Yet through that tiny space flows nearly a quarter of the world's most vital resource, oil.
That's it. That's the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly. And today, we're doing a deep dive into this absolutely crucial choke point. We want to uncover how its stability or instability directly impacts global energy, especially for a massive, fast-growing economy like India.
Yeah.
So our mission today is really to unpack the role of this waterway, understand India's specific vulnerabilities because they are unique, and then look at the really quite ingenious ways it's trying to build resilience, protection against potential disruptions.
Right.
By the end of this, you, our listener, should have a really clear picture of why this small stretch of water between Iran and Oman holds such enormous economic power, way beyond its size on the map.
It really is more than just geography, isn't it? It's this dynamic mix of geopolitics, economics, and fundamentally energy security. Absolutely.
What we'll do is connect the dots, show how events happening right there in that strait echo directly in your daily life, influencing everything like the price you pay for fuel, maybe broader economic stability too. It's a fascinating puzzle.
Okay, let's really get into it then, this geographical wonder. What is the Strait of Hormuz, fundamentally?
Okay, so picture its location. Nestled between Iran to the north and Oman, specifically its Muzandam Governorate, to the south.
Right.
At its narrowest point, it's only about 39 kilometers or roughly 21 nautical miles wide. That's incredibly narrow when you think about the traffic.
Tiny. And it's the only way by sea, right?
Yeah.
To get from the Persian Gulf out to the Arabian Sea and the wider ocean.
The only way. It connects the major oil producers of the Gulf, like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Iran, to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's the definition of a global trade bottleneck.
And its significance. I mean, the numbers are just staggering.
They really are. This isn't just some minor shipping lane. It's the choke point handling, get this, about 20% of the entire world's oil production.
20%. Yeah. Think about that. Daily, we're talking approximately 14.2 million barrels of crude oil.
Just crude.
Just crude. Plus another 5.9 million barrels per day of other petroleum products, things like LNG, diesel, gasoline components.
Wow.
It adds up to nearly 30 of the world's largest super tankers passing through every single day. And here's the kicker for our discussion. A huge 84% of that oil, that massive daily flow, is headed straight for Asia.
84%. That's incredible. We've seen some figures, right?
Yeah.
Suggesting something like $1.2 trillion in maritime trade flows through the wider Gulf region annually, heavily reliant on Hormuz.
Exactly. So it's not just about the oil itself, though that's huge. It's this massive pulsing artery for global commerce generally, affecting countless industries, economies, everything.
Which naturally brings us to the risks. What happens when this vital artery faces threats? Which it does.
It does. And right now, as of today, June 24th, 2025, there are definitely ongoing tensions simmering in the region. We've seen reports, for example, about Iran's parliament discussing potential measures, even considering a closure of the strait as retaliation for certain U.S. actions.
Has anything actually happened? A blockade?
No, not a full blockade. Nothing materialized in that sense. But the threat alone is enough. It immediately sparks these really intense discussions globally about energy security.
And historically, even just the threat has moved markets, right?
Oh, absolutely. Look back at the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s. The so-called tanker war saw attacks on shipping, causing widespread fear. Or even more recently, like in 2012, heightened tensions led to pretty noticeable spikes in global oil prices. The market hates uncertainty, and Hormuz is a major source of potential uncertainty. It reacts to perceived risk, not just actual closures.
So against that backdrop, what does it all mean specifically for India? I mean, third largest oil importer, third largest consumer, booming economy. It must be heavily reliant.
It is, significantly so. We've looked at the data, and while the exact numbers fluctuate, they all paint a picture of major dependence. For instance, in the first quarter of this year, 2025, India imported about 2.1 million barrels per day through Hormuz.
Okay.
That worked out to around 53% of its total oil imports at that time. 53% coming through that one narrow strait.
Half its oil?
Pretty much. But, and this is really interesting, we've seen a deliberate strategic shift. By May 2025, just a few months later, that figure dropped. It was down to around 2 million barrels per day, yes, but that accounted for only about 36% of total crude imports.
Wow, 53 down to 36%. That quickly. That's a big change.
It's a significant drop, and it's not accidental. It's a clear indicator of India actively managing its exposure. It's part of the strategy we'll get into.
Okay, but even at 36%, that's still a huge chunk. Who are the main suppliers still shipping to India via the Strait?
Oh, the region is still absolutely dominant in India's supply mix. The key players using Hormuz to supply India include Iraq. They were sending 1.2 million barrels per day in May 2025. That's substantial. Yeah.
Then you have Saudi Arabia chipping in with 0.615 million barrels per day, and the UAE with 0.49 million barrels per day.
So Iraq, Saudi, UAE.
Yeah.
The big Gulf producers.
Exactly. They highlight why the region remains critical even as India diversifies. So depending on the month, the global situation, that percentage might bounce around, between maybe 35% and over 50%. It shows how fluid these global energy flows really are.
Right. Okay, let's tackle the big what if, the nightmare scenario. If this neck of the bottle gets squeezed shut, a real blockade, what's the actual tangible impact? How does that hit home for you listening right now?
Look, a sustained blockade would be profound, immediate global and regional consequences. We'd be looking at massive disruptions to oil supplies on a scale few things could match.
And prices.
Through the roof. Dramatically higher global oil prices, inevitably. Some experts have estimated that just a $10 increase per barrel, which seems almost modest in a blockade scenario, could hike India's net oil import bill by a staggering $13 to $14 billion annually.
$13 to $14 billion just from a $10 rise. That's the estimate. So put that in perspective. I mean, that's like the entire yearly budget for a decent-sized Indian state, or a huge chunk of national infrastructure spending. It's an enormous economic shock hitting very quickly.
Wow. And what does that mean for everyday people, for us? How does that filter down?
It creates a cascade, really. For India, and honestly for many other countries too, you'd see much higher fuel prices at the pump. That hits your commute, your travel costs.
Right.
Then increased transport costs push up the price of basically everything. Goods, food from farms, manufactured items, it ripples everywhere.
So inflation.
Definitely potential for serious inflation. Plus, broader economic uncertainty. It could slow down industrial growth, put pressure on government budgets, squeeze household spending. It's a scenario that touches everyone, directly or indirectly. It just makes everything more expensive.
It sounds incredibly daunting, a really high-stakes situation. But as you hinted, India isn't just sitting there waiting for it to happen. This is where it gets really interesting for me. What specific steps has India taken? How is it shielding itself?
Right. India has definitely not been passive. It's adopted this multi-pronged approach, and diversification, aggressively diversifying its sources of oil, is a huge ongoing part of that strategy.
Like bringing in oil from new places.
Exactly. Russia is the prime example. Before 2022, Russia was what? Less than 1% of India's crude imports?
Yeah.
Almost negligible.
Tiny.
Now, it accounts for over 40%, a massive jump. In May 2025 alone, India imported 1.96 million barrels per day from Russia. That's not just tweaking the sources, it's a fundamental realignment of supply chains.
And crucially, that Russian oil, it doesn't come through Hormuz, does it?
Generally, no. It mostly travels via different routes. Think Baltic ports, Black Sea ports, then often through the Suez Canal, or sometimes even the long way around the Cape of Good Hope.
So it completely bypasses the strait.
It effectively circumnavigates that specific choke point. That drastically cuts down India's direct exposure if Hormuz faces disruption. And it's not just Russia. India is also strategically boosting imports from other places. The U.S., for example, imports jumped to 439,000 barrels per day in June 2025.
From the U.S.?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they continue sourcing from places like Brazil, West Africa, spreading the net wide.
It's like building resilience by having multiple suppliers, multiple routes. If one shop closes or one road is blocked, you've got other ways to get what you need. Makes sense. What else is in the toolkit?
Well, beyond diversification, there's the safety net. India maintains strategic petroleum reserves, or SPRs.
Right, the underground storage.
Exactly. Huge underground caverns filled with crude oil, enough to cover about 9 to 10 days of the country's import needs. That's the immediate buffer, the first line of defense against a sudden shock.
9 to 10 days. Is that enough?
It's a start, and on top of that, you have the commercial reserves held by the oil refineries themselves. That adds several more weeks of supply. So combined, it provides a cushion.
Okay, so reserves help short term. What about longer term?
Longer term, there's a big push on the domestic front, stepping up oil and gas exploration within India itself, trying to boost local production. There's also the push for alternative fuels, aiming for 20% ethanol blending in gasoline by 2025 is a major target.
Reducing the need for pure crude.
Precisely. And investing heavily in things like compressed natural gas, CNG, for vehicles, exploring green hydrogen, and obviously the big push towards electric vehicles. These aren't just environmental policies, they're core energy security strategies, too.
It sounds like a layered defense. We heard India's petroleum minister, Hardeep Singh Puri, mention recently, I think it was June 22nd, that India feels well-positioned to handle disruptions. He even said they're ready to adjust excise duties, taxes on fuel, if global prices shoot above $105 a barrel to cushion the blow for consumers.
Right. That shows a level of preparedness and political will to manage the fallout. It paints this picture of a nation actively learning, adapting, and building buffers against these global risks.
So connecting this back out, you mentioned earlier that 84% of Hormuz oil goes to Asia. India isn't alone in this dependence, is it?
Not at all. That's a critical point. While India is taking steps, Asia collectively receives the vast majority of the oil flowing through that strait. It's fundamentally an Asian energy security challenge, not just an Indian one.
Which raises a really interesting question. How do other big Asian economies compare? How do they stack up against India in terms of this dependence? Are they diversifying too?
It varies quite a bit, actually, and some are arguably more exposed than India currently is. Take China. World's biggest oil buyer, right?
Yeah.
In the first quarter of 2025, China imported a massive 5.4 million barrels per day through the strait. That alone was over half, more than 50% of all the Hormuz oil heading to East Asia.
Wow. So China's hugely reliant.
Hugely. Then look at South Korea. They imported 1.7 million barrels per day via Hormuz. For them, that represented about 68% of their total oil imports.
Two-thirds.
Yeah. And Japan is perhaps the most exposed. They imported 1.6 million barrels per day through the strait, which in 2024 accounted for a staggering 95% of their entire oil supply.
95%, almost all of it.
Almost entirely dependent on that one choke point. So these figures really hammer home the region's deep collective dependence. Even with India managing to bring its direct reliance down recently, the overall picture for Asia is one of profound vulnerability tied to Hormuz. Any disruption sends shockwaves across the entire continent.
It's clearly a massive global issue then, affecting way more than just the Middle East. Now, even if countries like India diversify where they buy oil from, what about the physical movement? If Hormuz were truly blocked, comprehensively shut down, are there realistic alternatives? Bypasses? Detours that could handle that kind of volume?
This is where the reality gets pretty stark. The alternatives are, well, they're extremely limited, especially when you consider the sheer scale we're talking about.
What options are there?
Okay, Saudi Arabia and the UAE do have some pipeline capacity that bypasses the strait. Together, it's about 2.6 million barrels per day.
Okay, 2.6 million. That sounds like a lot, but compared to...
Compared to the roughly 20 million barrels per day flowing through the strait, it's a fraction, maybe 10–15%. Iran also has its Gorgas pipeline project, which could theoretically handle maybe 300,000 barrels per day, but it's not really active right now.
So add those up. It's maybe 3 million barrels per day, bypass capacity, give or take.
At best. And that's against 20 million needing passage. Look, the infrastructure, the geopolitical hurdles, the immense cost, the time it would take to build anything significantly larger, it means these existing bypasses are like small relief valves in a giant pressure cooker. They are not and cannot realistically become comprehensive alternatives in the foreseeable future.
So the strait remains irreplaceable for global energy flow.
For now, absolutely. Its strategic importance is undeniable.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, our listener? You're living in this world of complex, interconnected energy flows. Even if India diversifies its buying, even if oil comes from Russia or the U.S., the global price of oil is still heavily influenced by Hormuz, right?
That's exactly the key takeaway. India has made really significant, impressive strides in reducing its direct vulnerability to a physical blockade of the strait. That's clear.
Right.
But the reality of global markets means that higher oil prices, triggered by any major disruption or even serious threat in Hormuz, would still ripple outwards and inevitably impact India's economy and many others.
So you can't fully insulate yourself from the price effect.
Not easily, no. It just highlights why countries need continuous vigilance, constant strategic planning for these kinds of global shocks, and a really nimble energy policy. As things stand today, June 24th, 2025, the situation around Hormuz is, let's say, tense but seems manageable. And that manageability is largely thanks to these proactive diversification and reserve strategies put in place by nations like India.
What we've really dug into today shows how this seemingly small, almost distant stretch of water wields immense, really disproportionate power over global energy. And through that, over the economic health of billions of people, it's this constant high-stakes dance between geopolitics, national ambition, and the basic need for energy security.
It truly does underscore how interconnected everything is, doesn't it? And it also shows how strategic thinking, how foresight in one country planning ahead, mitigating risks can actually create ripples of resilience that help buffer the entire global system against what could otherwise be really crippling uncertainty.
So maybe something to think about as you go about your day.
hmm
Beyond Hormuz, how many other hidden choke points exist in our complex global systems? Think about trade routes, maybe digital infrastructure, critical supply chains for other goods. What other unexpected vulnerabilities or maybe even surprising strengths might be lurking just beneath the surface of our everyday lives? It's a powerful reminder, I think, that really understanding the world often means looking past the headlines, doesn't it? Delving into those deeper, often hidden currents that truly shape our reality.